We don't know very much. There weren't many details. Does it surprise you that Iran and perhaps Russia would be trying to send disinformation to really tamper with our elections?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all. And I think that we need to be prepared for these kinds of intrusions, these kinds of attempts to interfere with our electoral system. What struck me as a little strange was just the press conference that was held last night. With the information that was shared was not particularly something that was unanticipated, but to try to spin it as an attack on the Trump administration and the Trump campaign, as opposed to an attack on the American electoral system, I thought was just a little different and unexpected.
And also, I'm not an authority on this. You are. It seemed a little primitive to have supposedly Proud Boys send some email messages saying, if you don't vote for President Trump, we're coming after you. Is that really the way Iran would go after something like that, or Russia for that matter?
Yeah, I mean, you see these intrusions in a number of ways. Some of them are extremely sophisticated. Some of them are, as you say, pretty crude. And so they just really run the gamut. What the American people need to be aware of is everything that you see on the internet is not necessarily accurate. There are a whole range of motives why things are posted, both by foreign actors as well as people acting domestically. And then I think it's incumbent upon our intelligence agencies working with their state and local partners to push back and to try to filter as much of this as is possible. And I think the private sector and the platforms that through which much of this stuff passes have a responsibility as well.
Eric, one thing that both sides of the aisle basically agree on is that the stakes are really high in this election. And we in the media tend to focus on the presidency, of course, and the Senate, because it might flip, might not flip, and the House of Representatives. But you really have an initiative focusing on something longer term and frankly, farther down the ballot. And that is the question of redistricting and why this is a particularly important year right now because of the census. Explain what you're up to.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. I get it. This is an existential election. However you decide that, you want to vote, this is obviously a very important presidential election. But we really have to focus on these down ballot races. We're going to go through a redistricting process in 2021, and the people elected this year will be the ones who will help draw those lines. I'm the head of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, and we're trying to make sure that the process in 2021 is a fair one, and that the lines are drawn not to protect incumbents, but to make sure that elections are competitive, and that we end up with representatives at the state level who will represent the interests of the people and not the special interests. And people need to understand that on a day-to-day basis, you're probably more impacted by who serves in your state legislature than you are by the president of the United States. When you're concerned about criminal justice reform, protecting a woman's reproductive rights, protecting the right to vote, a lot of healthcare decisions. These are decided, as I said, more in the state legislature than they are in Washington, D.C.
So this comes up because the census, according to the Constitution, has to happen every 10 years, and this is one of the 10 years. And ironically, this time it's with the presidential, which doesn't happen that often. I guess every 20 years that happens more or less. What happened 10 years ago?
Well, 10 years ago, we ended up with a process that Princeton University said was the most gerrymandered redistricting effort of the last half century. Republicans used the power that they got in the 2010 midterms to really draw the lines in a way that favored them, and we had to deal with that over the course of the last 10 years. What my organization is trying to do is to make sure that we just have a fair process, one that doesn't favor Democrats, one that doesn't favor Republicans, one that doesn't gerrymander for either party, but just draws the lines in a fair way. I worked with Arnold Schwarzenegger on this effort. He and I have a piece that's out in Missouri today trying to protect something that we helped put in place there, which was a nonpartisan redistricting commission that will draw the lines, take the power away from self-interested politicians, and put it in the hands of a neutral body. Passed by the citizens of Missouri. Politicians there are now trying to weaken it. He and I did an op-ed that posted today that said, don't do that, push back against these politicians and preserve that neutral body.
So, Eric, you took us just where I wanted to go, which was to say, now you're representing the Democrats on this. Would you be willing to take it out of the political sphere and give it to a bipartisan commission? Or is it more a matter of we want to make sure our Democrats control the state houses so that we get to gerrymander?
No, I actually think that the best way, the gold standard, is to create these nonpartisan commissions. They already exist have existed for some time in Arizona and in California. We were instrumental in getting them put into Michigan, Missouri, Colorado, and Utah, and they will be doing the redistricting next year. I think that's the gold standard. That is the best way to do it. Politicians, whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, are going to try to, protect their districts, protect their party, put it in the hands of these nonpartisan bodies. That way, you will end up with, I think, the fairest line drawing, and you will end up with legislatures that are more beholden to the people as opposed to the special interests. And I think if we have a fair process, let me be very clear. I think Democrats and progressives will do just fine. But I don't want to gerrymander for Democrats. Let's let independent commissions draw the lines.
Eric, the Supreme Court is very much on all of our minds right now. We have Judge Amy Coney Barrett today being referred to the full Senate for what looks like will be a confirmation next week. To what extent does the Constitution limit, or the Supreme Court limit, the degree of gerrymandering? I know that for some reasons you cannot gerrymander, for example, for race. But what about when it comes to politics? Could that be a limiting factor, or could it be actually the reverse of that if we have a 6-3 conservative majority, which is what some people call it?
Yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court, in a decision just this past year, which I think was wrongly decided, said that the federal courts cannot hear partisan gerrymandering cases. Federal courts are still open to hear racial gerrymandering cases. And so as a result, we've had to bring lawsuits in the state courts using the state constitutions when we wanted to attack partisan gerrymandering schemes. I think that decision was wrong. I think the federal courts are uniquely situated to deal with questions of gerrymandering, whether they be partisan or racial in nature. So the courts clearly have an important role to play here. My hope would be that the courts will stay open to hearing racial gerrymandering cases. My hope also will be that ultimately the court would reverse itself and recognize that the decision that they made in the Ruchko case was a wrong one, and open the federal courts up to partisan gerrymandering cases as well.
Eric, more generally, how concerned are you, as formerly our foremost lawyer in the country, about legal challenges and disputes coming out of this election? Are we going to have a clean election?
Yeah, I think we are. I mean, I think we got to be prepared, for cases being the election, parts of the election being decided in the courts. And I think you might see a lot of litigation leading up to the election when decisions are being made about, signature matches on votes by mail, how long polling places should stay open, all those kinds of things. But I actually think that the turnout is going to be sufficiently large, and I suspect the decision of the American people is going to be pretty decisive. So I don't really anticipate that the courts will play a significant role post-election, but it's clear that both campaigns are getting ready, have lawyers all around the country, and prepared to litigate whatever might surface.
Yeah, it would be awfully nice to let the voters decide rather than the courts. I think we both can agree on that.
That'd be a good thing.